I stand up next to a mountain and chop it down with the edge of my hand.
My grandma is from a small village in China and sold fish for a living a long time ago. She once told me a story about a fish demon in the water. It occurred when there was suddenly a huge abundance of fish, and that's when people really started to notice something was up. In ancient Chinese mythology, if an animal gets enough spiritual energy, it can transform into human form or become a big monster and harm human nature, often feasting on human flesh. The children of the village loved to swim in the water, as this was a very long time ago. Stuff like bacteria, infections, etc. weren't common knowledge. And keep in mind, this is a very poor village. It is all really safe. Well, at least had been until lately. Bodies of some children have been washed ashore. Now, to say they are bodies will be incorrect because they are still alive, but you can tell from their eyes a part of them is gone. It is said that the fish demons eat children's souls, taking away all their feelings and memories, and the children are essentially walking zombies. Many of them later walked back into the river and drowned, whilst trying to lure other children in the water to play with them. Some have said they became a subordinate to the fish demon, a slave to bring it more meals. As it was still a young demon, it could only feed on children, but as time passed, the demon got stronger and its powers were strong enough to feast on adults. There is more to this story. I will keep updating when my grandma is able to remember more. She said she was one of the children who were taken by the fish demon, but her mother somehow got her back. I will keep updated when I find out how. When I was 14, I had a strange encounter that still puzzles me to this day. On the weekends, I'd sometimes go to my mother's place. My parents are divorced. The house she lived in was converted into several small apartments. It was a creepy old farmhouse. The house was at least 150, maybe 200 years old. My mum told me off and on of strange sounds she'd been hearing and seeing things in the corner of her eyes, feelings of being watched. This one particular evening when I spent the night, I brought my Nintendo 64 because my mum would go to bed early and I'd still be up for a few more hours. I still remember to this day what game I was playing. WWF No Mercy. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, playing the story mode. I just finished a mission in the game and set down the controller to the left of me, behind me. Directly behind me was a recliner. I'll never forget what I saw next. I went to grab the controller, and I saw what appeared to be a hoof, like a horse next to the controller on the floor. Insects and blood was coming out of the sliver that separated the hoof. I thought to myself, how strange. I slowly glanced up, and this demonic figure was staring back at me. It leaned down towards me. Its face got down on my level, and it grinned the most evil smile. The eyes, black, face red, blood was dripping from its teeth. It was so surreal, I immediately went into a panic attack and blacked out. I learned later it was the fight or flight response. Several seconds later, I came to, laying on the floor. I could barely move. The demonic figure in the chair laughing at me. It was as if my fear and energy had been sucked dry from me. I lost all strength. I did all I could to crawl up to my mum's room and woke her up. After I woke her up, we talked and she believed me. She told me She too had seen the same thing earlier that week, but didn't want to scare me. I don't know what to make of it and still think of it to this day. I have no doubt demons and angels are real, and believe me, the last thing you ever want to encounter is a demon smiling in your face. I don't care if you believe me or not, but when two people see the same thing on two separate occasions, either we're both crazy, or something is or was wrong with that old farmhouse. My mum has thankfully moved since, and we haven't encountered that thing again. My boyfriend and I decided yesterday to help my father move into my grandmother's house. My parents are currently going through a nasty divorce, and my mother has taken all of his money and sold the house. He was kicked out the day after the divorce was announced. My mother tried to keep us from my dad by telling us how horrible and awful he is. Neither of us like my mother, and she's a compulsive liar, so it was a no-brainer that we would help him with everything. My grandmother's house has 3 bedrooms and a large basement with a crawl space and storage room. My grandmother is the sweetest and kindest lady you'll ever meet, and was super happy to have my dad living with her again. My grandfather recently passed away from C. diff, which is a horrible bacterial infection. He essentially bled out through his intestines after they burst. We were all able to say goodbye to him, but it was still a horrible death. For months before he died, my little cousin, 11 years old, my aunt, and I had nightmares about a large black figure coming to take my grandfather away. The figure was always in the basement, and it was always laughing menacingly. Whenever any of us would visit, we would avoid the basement unless someone else came down with us. All 3 of us have had paranormal experiences in the past, and we believe we are sensitive about these things. The thing in the basement terrified us more than anything. I had a similar nightmare the day after he passed. However, the figure already had my grandfather in its grasp. I hadn't been back to the house for about a year after he passed. The night before we went to the home to help my father move in, both my boyfriend and I had a terrible nightmare about the basement and the figure in it. I can't describe the primal fear that was elicited from the laugh of the creature. We went nonetheless. We arrived around 10 a.m. and spent all day unpacking the moving truck and getting my dad settled. We had dinner around 6 p.m. and I was asked to unpack some things in the basement. My boyfriend went with me and we took down a bunch of boxes. The whole time we were down there, we felt as though we were being watched. It didn't help that my grandma has a collection of Anne of Green Gables dolls and various other porcelain dolls in the room where we were unpacking. About a quarter of the way through the first box, one of the dolls fell off the shelf onto the bed. We put her back up and tried to shake off the nervous feeling we had. We kept hearing thumping noises from the storage room next to us, which developed into banging and pounding. My dad came down to see what the noise was all about, and just as he entered the basement, the pounding knocked another doll off the shelf. His face went pale, and he told us to come back upstairs. As we were headed up the stairs, we heard laughing from the storage room. This made us all book it up to the kitchen. My grandma heard the laughing and said, "Just ignore him, he'll go away." This made us even more nervous, especially when she wouldn't elaborate. We were watching TV and getting ready to leave when we heard a loud bang in the basement, and my grandma asked us to check it out. She had been having troubles with her boiler and thought that that was what had banged. My dad, boyfriend and I all went down slowly and very tentatively to see what the issue was. We opened the door to see a mess. All of the boxes and jars in the storage room were tossed about, and in the middle of the room was an old-looking Ouija board. My dad grabbed my arm and pulled me back and shut the door as quickly as he could. He stormed upstairs and confronted my grandma about why there was a Ouija board in her storage room. Apparently, she has been trying to contact my grandpa. She was hearing and seeing things that she thought was signs that he was trying to talk to her. So, she got out the board that my dad and my uncles used to use and tried to talk to him. The only problem is that my uncles and my dad had a terrible experience with that specific board when they were in college. They had been hit, scratched, their room had been destroyed, and they had heard evil laughter. They had done the Ouija board in the exact room it was in now. My dad explained this to us as we kept hearing things being tossed around downstairs. He said that he recognized the board and that they had burned the board over 35 years ago. My grandma's face began to drop as she understood that this thing was definitely not Grandpa. We then saw a large black mass gather at the bottom of the basement steps and slowly rise up towards us. We all scattered and ran out of the various exits of the house away from this thing. My grandma was inconsolable because she finally realized that it was not my grandfather, and because it felt like it wanted to do us harm. My grandma has lived in this house for 50 years and has raised 3 boys there. She has never experienced evil the way it manifested like that. By 9 p.m, we were all tired and ready to go in the house and try and get my dad and grandma settled for bed so boyfriend and I could head out. We didn't have enough room in our apartment to bring both of them to our place, and we didn't want to leave anyone alone. So they decided to stay together upstairs and we'd leave our phones on in case they needed us. We headed inside and I went to go to the washroom. In my grandma's washroom there is a large teddy bear that used to be my favorite toy when I was little. It would laugh and sing to me and it was super cuddly. It was sitting above the medicine cabinet, parallel to the toilet. As I was finishing up business, I heard demonic sounding electronic laughter coming from this teddy bear that hadn't worked in 20 years. I looked up towards the thing, absolutely terrified, and saw its head turn towards me suddenly. For reference, this bear never, ever, ever moved. There were no animatronics in this bear to enable it to move. Even the stitching on the head of the bear should have made it impossible to move. I screamed as loud as I could above the noise of the laughing while this thing's head kept turning from side to side. The old oak door to the bathroom had locked on its own and wouldn't budge no matter what I did to move the deadbolt. My boyfriend ended up breaking the door down with my dad. The teddy bear continued to laugh maniacally for about 20 minutes before my grandma finally chucked it outside. My boyfriend and I got the heck out of there, and I don't think we will ever go back. I called my aunt and told her everything that had happened, and she told me she had a nightmare the night before about the demon figure in the basement eating me alive. I told my dad this, and he convinced my grandma to contact the local parish to do a blessing on the home. I have had my fair share of experiences with the paranormal, but this thing was utterly evil and powerful. I am very concerned for my dad and my grandma's health and well-being, but there is nowhere else for them to go. My dad's divorce left him destitute, and my grandma's other son owns her home and refuses to let her sell. From her reaction to the entity, I'd say this has been going on for a while. I believe she has invited whatever it is in because she thought it was her husband. She may have even ignored everything, believing she was going crazy until we all experienced it with her. It has left her emotionally unstable, knowing that it is something else, not Grandpa. Meanwhile, my boyfriend and I are shaken and a little scared from that experience. We can only hope it didn't follow us home. I was in 4th grade, coming home after a basketball game. It was late at night and the moon was full. My pawpaw had picked me up, and we went to Wendy's, and I got my classic chicken nuggets and a chocolate frosty, because he always treated me out to food. I still remember the blue jersey and my team name like it was yesterday. We were riding in the van my pawpaw owned, back to my house, and we parked across from my house in the backyard driveway. The way the gravel driveway is set up, it's wide and slightly long, and we had parked on the side further away from the side of my house. My door was facing that side of the house. I had gotten out of the van to go inside, so I grabbed my chicken nuggets and hopped out of the van, while my pawpaw was trying to get something out of the van. Just then I noticed something and look over, and there was the thing that would haunt me for years to come. It was a demon-like entity. As a kid, I have watched Ghost Hunters and all the alien shows, and had been informed into this world of the paranormal. But this was my first ever experience that led me down the path I'm at today with the dead and demons. It had a tail and long sharp claws, horns on its head and teeth that looked like razors, dripping a slimy liquid. The fur on its back was sharp and pointed off like it could cut me open with one touch. It was like a weird porcupine's, but it was thin and shaved in a mohawk style down its back. Hollow black sockets for eyes. I could feel its negative energy even as a kid. I knew it was bad, and it wasn't there for a great time. I watched it as it stood there, looking away, staring at the road we were just on like it had waited for us. I waited, speechless. I couldn't breathe as my body slammed against the van like my life was being sucked away from fear. I watched as this demon slowly turns its head to look me dead in the eye. At this point, I waited for an attack or something to happen. As soon as it saw me, it ran around the house to the front like it was scared of me. Thinking back, I was a kid with such positive light and a kind soul, and I'm sure it saved me that night. I thought it was a cat till I noticed the shadow did not hit the ground but instead wrapped around the house like a snake. My pawpaw stepped out of the van and asked me if I was okay, like he knew what I saw. I would never understand why he seemed like he knew what I saw. That night stuck with me for so long, and I did not open up about it for the longest time. Time flies by, and now I'm much older. I'm in college, about to finish and growing in life. I'd forgotten about the time I saw that thing. Well, one day, I'd met a guy through a friend of mine. His name was Logan. He said he felt like we were connected somehow, which I had no understanding of why. Logan was a demonologist. He had a long history with demons and exorcisms, and I thought his adventures were cool. Me and him hung out several times, and we would trade stories about all the crazy crap that has happened to us. And I also helped him on a lot of his cases, since I had many talents to provide, such as talking to the dead and being psychic. One day, he had told me of a friend of his who had a horrible demon attached to him. I thought it was interesting to hear of the story, and asked more on it. Supposedly, Logan had done some alchemy to try and trap the demon, but it had escaped and was trying to harm him. Me being able to see the dead, he needed my help to find secret roots to trees and help him capture this demon. I was hesitant at first, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for such a high task, since I finally started to get somewhere with my gifts. Well, I agreed. We gathered the roots and prepared to do the ritual to trap it. We set everything up and we started. I was fine, but all of a sudden I blanked out and got a vision. I asked him for a piece of paper and started scribbling and drawing uncontrollably, like I wasn't controlling my hand. I have these normally, and at this point Logan was used to it. He knew I was seeing a sign, someone or something. I stopped and looked down at what I drew. On the paper was the hollow sockets, the horns, the teeth, the fur. The demon who had come to me when I was young. His friend's demon was my demon. I had seen him first, way before that poor boy had become possessed by him. Logan had seen it once before, and I showed him the drawing. His eyes widened in fear, and I knew what I had drawn was what he saw. He shook his head. He was freaked out. I told him the story of my childhood and what happened, and he told me more details on the demon. As he was talking, I felt 3 finger-like pressures run across my forehead. I asked him what the 3 fingers thing I felt was. When he had done his research, the demon harms you with 3 scratches, but it seemed like he wanted to hurt me, but he could only do pressure. It seemed like I was too strong. When I heard that, I got a nervous jitter. Oh God, he remembers me. That's when we finished up the ritual and trapped it because I was done with this demon and wanted it gone. To this day, I still get a feeling of him when I think of the jar we trapped him in and my memories. It's like he is trapped in my head, a piece of my mind, my own Build-A-Bear demon. And that is the story of my childhood demon, returning for a visit. An update. It's been a while since I wrote the first part to this, and boy, have things been interesting since I last wrote. First, I want to start with the actual ritual itself we used to trap the demon, so the story makes more sense. The ritual we used was an alchemist ritual. It took a large jar, iron, liquid, a rock, nails, sigils on the floor, and the biggest ingredient was a drop of blood from the person performing the ritual, and a personal sacrifice from them. No, not animals or anything wild like that. Logan sacrificed his 3rd eye, his abilities, in a sense. Him sacrificing his 3rd eye keeps the demon trapped and keeps us all safe. This plays into the long run of this update. Flash forward to now. I'm married, working on my 2nd degree, and have moved states away from where I originally was. So a lot has changed. I haven't kept in touch with Logan, except with the minor exemption of this one day. I'd been working in the house when I received a phone call from Logan. He had asked me if I had any weird experiences or anything happened recently. Me being concerned, I said no, not currently, but why do you ask? He said he had been messing around with magic that involved going back in time through astral projection to make changes. Now, I didn't think much about this, but I would soon find out that that small conversation meant a lot. I later received a phone call from another friend letting me know that he had gone back to get his 3rd eye abilities reinstated, and from the sound of it, she said he succeeded. She told me she thought she would call to warn me because she knew about the ritual we had done. The first thing I thought of was the day that he used it to trap the demon. I have pondered on that conversation all day, and I was very anxious. But I had high hopes that if he took back his 3rd eye abilities, it wouldn't cause the demon to get loose. And boy was I wrong, because the next day I got a phone call from my husband's family telling me his grandmother was in the hospital from a sudden attack, and she had no clue where it came from, and there was a possibility she would not make it. If you don't know this demon, he preys on people who are very religious, people who believe deeply and are high up in their religion. I know this for 2 reasons. Logan had let me know what he preys on, and not even a few months after I had seen it with my pawpaw, he had passed away. My profile was a highly devoted Christian who played music in the church. My husband's grandma is a devoted Buddhist, and when I heard she had an attack out of nowhere, I got extremely nervous after everything that went down with Logan the prior day. I ran into the room where I could do my spell work. I'm a long-time practicing Wiccan as well. I immediately started working on a protection spell for my husband's grandmother. And then, I felt a sudden anxiety come over me, and I could hear what sounded like a small growl. I felt those same 3 fingers press on my forehead as it did that time ago, as if it wanted me to sacrifice what Logan couldn't. I hurried as fast as I could to finish off the protection spell and get everything made. After everything was done, I cleansed my space and did extra precautious things to make sure the house was safe. That day, I was more worried about her than I was myself. As soon as I finished the protection spell, I got a phone call from my husband's family telling me that she was okay. and it ended up just being an asthma attack. They got her medication and she is fine now. My heart sank with relief. I knew the demon had gone to attack her. The wild thing is, the jar is already at the bottom of this river, and in a state that I am no longer living in, and I cannot go back to trap it, nor am I willing to sacrifice my third eye, because it is part of the abilities that make me a medium. I haven't kept in touch with Logan because this has made me so angry, and I know the demon is still out there, waiting for me to give in. I do protection things around the house every single day, and on all my friends and family. I don't know if I'll ever see the demon again, or if he'll come to visit me when my time is up. All I know is, he's out there, somewhere, free to roam, and free to continue taking those who he wants to devour. I need to write this down and share because this is a totally different experience than just ghosts, angels, demons and all that. I feel like you'll very much be intrigued and confused if you can listen to this entire story. This is a long story about an entity I've had attached to me for roughly 2.5 to 3 years now. And honestly, I'm so heightened to the experiences that I was never really terrified or wanting to cleanse the energy away. I seriously believe that whatever this entity is, it was never human or part of our realm. I will go more in depth later in the story, but this creature almost mocks the Christian ideologies of angels and demons. This entity is not negative nor positive, and I believe it does not have a gender, although I feel a more masculine presence over a feminine one. So let's begin. The first experience I ever had with this creature clicked in my head and has made me shift my idea on how the entity became attached to me. At first I believed it was because I used a Ouija board, and a few days later I noticed the presence a lot more, but no. I have later remembered that I did a guided third eye meditation which is no longer on YouTube, and I'm glad it's not, because if this happened to someone who wasn't as capable with energies, I would be very worried. The meditation I did about 4.5 years ago was very strange. I remember laying down in my bed and listening to the voice on the video. It asked you to start breathing in a very strange way. You had to almost have a shaking breathing style and listen to audios I've never heard on any other guided or non-guided meditation, and I have participated in endless amounts of them. During the meditation, I felt and envisioned a large black hand with long nails on the left side of my chest. It felt as if I was sitting up in my bed, and I could feel the hand push me gently back down onto the bed. I didn't want to break the meditative state, and even though my heart began to race, I continued to keep my eyes closed, and I followed to the end of the meditation when I could hear the voice giving cues to wake up again. After sitting up, all I could see was a strange purple aura around everything I looked at. This comes into play later. After that meditation, I never really noticed the energy or hand again, until fast forward a few years when I was using the Ouija board. A few days after using the board, I started to feel a very angry masculine presence on the far corner of my garage, the same garage I used the board in. I paid no mind to it really, at first, due to the fact that since I was a child, I've been having experiences and feeling energies, so at that point I was accustomed to it. The energy started to become more comfortable with my presence, and I began to no longer feel that negative energy. I can feel a very heavy energy in my stomach and chest, but it is no longer dark and negative. After a few months of feeling the presence every day, it began to, for lack of better language, try to mess with me more in a childish yet more powerful way than I've ever felt any other energy do. This energy I strongly believe is the most powerful I have ever personally encountered, and possibly will ever encounter. The entity would always be behind me when I was walking to the garage door to leave. Many times I would go to open the door and it would close itself. I could feel the entity behind me and I started to talk aloud to it from then on. I don't get verbal responses that I can hear, or responses at all. It's more the entity will do something in response to my words, or will shift the energy I'm feeling as to give a response. The entity definitely likes to use doors the best when it wants my attention, but it has actually touched me, like the meditation, and another few times. I was with my friend at probably 2 a.m. in our small town, in the grocery store parking lot on our bikes. We didn't want to drive since it was summer and we were taking in the fresh air. I closed my eyes while standing in the empty parking lot. I was hovering over my bike and my friend was beside me. All of a sudden I felt those same black hands with sharp nails, gently on my lower back. I immediately opened my eyes and looked to my friend, who could straight away see something had happened. I asked if she touched me, which she said no since she was beside me the whole time. She would start to sometimes feel the entity's energy around me. One time I was driving, probably a couple of weeks after the parking lot incident, and she saw the hand come beside my face while I was driving. That same summer we went on a trip together with 2 other people. There was a small pond near the Airbnb we were staying at, and it was about 3 a.m. We were about to go to the pond and one of the people we were with yelled "Hail Satan" into the pond forested area. I told my friend after that the entity was planting the idea in my head that we shouldn't go in there. I was feeling super heavy, and as I said that, she had a look in her eyes that I won't forget. She mentioned she could see the dark entity wrapping its arms around my shoulders, as if to hold me down to not go in. We went to the pond area anyways, as a light from a utility shed kept flashing on and off a total of 3 separate times. My friend and I knew we all had to pack up our stuff and leave the bench we were sitting on. We left the pond, and the next day the 2 other people on the trip who aren't very spiritually inclined or open to it left for the day, and my friend and I went back to the pond. We both had an overwhelming need to for whatever reason. We noticed the bench we were sitting on the night before was a memorial bench, and the 2 others had disrespected that space, and that is why the entity was trying to get me to leave the pond that first night. Fast forward to after the summer trip to around October 2019. I started dating my significant other, and my friend from before was at my SO's house with me and her boyfriend at the time. We were all sitting at the kitchen table and the door behind us opened by itself. My friend looked to me and said, "Hey." So I replied, "That's not very nice, sir. Close the door." Needless to say, everyone almost died of shock when the door immediately closed. This is when I started to really know that this entity is very, very real. It will do things in front of the people I'm around and not just in front of me. That was what really stuck in my head. Other small experiences included the shower curtain blowing open when I was showering, the screen door to my house holding open once I swung it open and there was no wind. A door near my entryway always opens when I haven't paid much attention to the entity's presence and it wants to remind me. When I was watching the nun, he mimicked the hands over my face in the coffin scene to mock the Christian demons and movie. And I could go on, but I think you get the idea. This entity, I notice, has a purple aura, which is what made me realize that it was attached to me, most likely because of the meditation. Anyways, this entity's still always around me. Just yesterday I got goosebumps and chills all over my body when I was in a down mood, and I could feel the entity directly behind me, not trying to drain my energy, but I was feeling very alone, and it was almost like it was trying to comfort me. I've decided that I'm not going to try and cleanse this energy away, and I'll let it stay for as long as it feels like. Since I'm not being drained, it's not hurting anyone, and I see no need to detach the entity if it doesn't want to go and isn't doing anything. It's been attached to me fully for up to 3 years now, and is a normal part of my daily life. I'd love to know what you think of this. Any comments or questions would be appreciated. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.